She told me I was off limits. Maybe she meant it as a warning, maybe as a test. But the way her hand lingered on my shoulder, I knew I had to find where her rules ended, and where we began. I still remember the first evening I trained with her. The gym was mostly empty, the echoes of weights clanging in the distance fading one by one until it was just the two of us. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the polished floor. It felt less like a place for drills and more like a quiet stage where every small sound, every small movement, carried meaning. She walked toward me with that composed grace that always made people stop and notice without quite knowing why. Not because she was loud or flashy, but because she carried herself with the calm certainty of someone who had lived enough life to never need to prove anything again. 40-something, confident, and poised, the kind of presence you don't just look at, you feel. Her voice was steady, low, controlled. There's something you need to understand before we start. She stood close enough that I could catch the faintest trace of her perfume, clean and subtle, layered under the sharper scent of chalk that clung to her hands. She let the silence hang just a second too long before continuing. This, whatever you think this is, her hand gestured lightly between us. It's off limits. You get that, right? I nodded, but my attention betrayed me. The way her fingers brushed my shoulder as she adjusted my stance was meant to be instructional, impersonal. Yet her touch stayed a breath longer than it needed to. The warmth of her palms sank through the fabric of my shirt, and for a moment I forgot about balance, form, or posture. All I could register was that simple point of connection. I told myself not to overthink it. She was a coach, I was her trainee. That was all. Still, my mind didn't let go so easily. When she corrected the angle of my arm, her fingertips grazed across the inside of my elbow, light as air. Every move was precise, professional, but also intimate in ways I couldn't ignore. Focus, she reminded me, her tone firm. Yet her eyes, when they met mine, softened just for an instant. It was the kind of glance that holds something unsaid, quickly hidden, but not fully erased. The session went on, her commands crisp, her presence grounding. But I couldn't stop feeling the duality in every instruction, discipline on the surface, something warmer flickering underneath. And beneath all of it, the unshakable echo of her words, off limits. It was supposed to sound final, like a door locked shut. Instead, it felt like a threshold she'd pointed out in the dark. A line drawn, yes, but one that begged the question of what might exist on the other side. By the time we wrapped up, my muscles ached, my shirt clung damp to my skin, and my head swam with more than just exertion. She stood near the exit, arms folded, back straight, every inch the professional. But I caught the way her gaze lingered as I gathered my things. Not long, not obvious. Just enough for me to know that the rules she'd laid down wasn't just about me, it was about us. And rules, I realized, have a way of daring you to see how close you can get to the edge. The next session felt different from the very beginning. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her, or maybe it was the unspoken tension from the last time we stood in that gym. Whatever it was, the air seemed heavier, like every breath had to be drawn more carefully. She greeted me with her usual calm professionalism, but there was a flicker in her eyes that betrayed something else, something she was determined not to let surface. Her words were clipped, precise, yet her presence carried a quiet charge that settled between us before we even began. Your form needs work, she said, gesturing for me to take my stance. I obeyed, though I could feel her watching me closely, the weight of her attention pressing against my back before her hand ever touched it. And then it did. Her palm came to rest between my shoulder blades, firm, steady, guiding. She leaned in, her voice low, almost a whisper against my ear. Straighten here. Breathe deeper. Don't lock your knees. Her instructions were simple, yet they landed like confessions, private and hushed, meant only for me. Her body aligned with mine for a moment as she adjusted my posture, her chest brushing lightly against my back, her warmth seeping through the thin fabric of my shirt. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. Every nerve in me woke at once. I told myself this was routine, that any coach would correct a student this way. But then why did her touch linger just half a second longer than necessary? Why did her breath, brushing the side of my face, send my thoughts scattering into places they weren't supposed to go? Better, she murmured, stepping back reluctantly, as if pulling herself away required effort. I turned my head slightly, catching her expression, the faint crease of focus, yes, but also something softer, like she was fighting against her own instinct. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat neither of us moved. There was no command, no lesson in that glance. Only something raw, unguarded. She cleared her throat and circled around me, reclaiming her authority. Again. From the top. So I did. And each time, she was there, correcting, guiding, adjusting. Her hands firm on my waist, her fingertips brushing my forearm, the light press of her knee against mine as she demonstrated alignment. Every contact was professional in its excuse, but personal in its impact. I wanted to tell her what it felt like, how even the smallest brush of her hand carried more weight than any instruction. But instead I said nothing. I just listened, obeyed, and let myself feel. The session ended with sweat cooling on my skin and my chest rising heavy with breath. She handed me a towel without a word, her fingers grazing mine. It was such a small thing, the transfer of fabric from her hand to mine, but I felt it echo through me. And then she looked at me, really looked. Not as a coach to a student, but as a woman to a man. Just for a second, before she turned away, armor snapping back into place. But I caught it. That softness. That slip in her guard. And in that moment, I understood, it wasn't just me who was struggling to keep this within bounds. It was late when I found her still in the gym. Most of the lights had been turned off, leaving only a few overhead lamps buzzing faintly above the court. The air was cooler than usual, the echo of my footsteps filling the empty space as I walked toward her. She was sitting on the edge of the mat, one knee bent, the other leg stretched out, sipping slowly from a bottle of water, as if time itself had finally slowed down enough for her to breathe. I had never seen her like that before. Not commanding, not in control, not correcting or instructing. Just still. "Long day?" I asked, my voice softer than usual, like I didn't want to disturb the fragile quiet around her. She glanced up at me, and for the first time, I noticed a faint tiredness in her eyes. "You could say that," she replied, her tone calm but edged with something heavier. She patted the mat beside her, an invitation I didn't hesitate to accept. I sat close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, though not close enough to touch. She took another sip of water, then handed me the bottle. Our fingers brushed as I accepted it, a small contact, but it sent a flicker through me all the same. The bottle was cool, condensation slick against my palm, her warmth still lingering on the spot where she had held it. "You're always so composed," I said after a moment, turning the bottle slowly in my hand. "But right now you seem different." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Composed? That's a polite way of saying I carry too much weight on my shoulders." Her gaze drifted toward the far wall, lost in thought. She spoke carefully, as if each word carried risk. "People expect me to have it all together. To never falter, never blur lines, never step outside the role I've been given." Her voice trailed, and I saw it then, the vulnerability she worked so hard to conceal. Beneath the strength, the discipline, the rules she enforced, there was a woman who felt just as human, just as conflicted, as anyone else. I wanted to reach for her hand, to offer something tangible, but I held back. Instead, I leaned closer, letting my voice drop to match the intimacy of the moment. "It's okay to falter. It's okay to want something for yourself." Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide, almost startled. For a second, it felt like I had pulled something unspoken to the surface. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied me with a silence that felt heavier than words. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as if she had stopped herself from saying too much. Finally, she whispered, "You don't know how dangerous that is, to tell me that." I smiled faintly, unable to help myself. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just honest." The gym was silent except for the faint hum of the lights, the quiet rhythm of our breathing, and the sound of my heart pounding against my ribs. Sitting there, in that pool of half-light, I realized the cracks in her armor weren't weaknesses at all. They were doorways. And every time she let me glimpse through one, I found myself stepping closer to the person she truly was, not just my coach, but a woman standing on the edge of something neither of us could quite name. The gym looked different at night. The usual noise of training, the rhythm of voices and movement, had faded. What remained was an almost sacred silence, broken only by the low buzz of the lights overhead. The world outside was dark, but here, inside, it felt like time had slowed just enough to trap the two of us in our own private space. She was showing me a new move, something technical, complicated, requiring precision. I followed her steps as best I could, but after a few failed attempts, she shook her head and stepped closer. "No," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. "Like this." Her hands found my arms, guiding them gently but firmly into position. I felt the press of her fingertips on my skin through the thin fabric of my shirt, warm and steady. She moved behind me, aligning my posture, her chest brushing lightly against my back as she adjusted my shoulders. Her breath touched the side of my neck when she spoke again. "Relax here, don't force it." I tried to listen, but my body was no longer responding to just her instructions. Every small touch, every brush of her hair against my jaw, every moment her presence closed the distance between us. It all stirred something I wasn't supposed to feel. She shifted in front of me, close now, her hands still guiding mine. The mat beneath our feet creaked softly as we moved in tandem. For a moment, we stood almost chest to chest, her eyes lifted to meet mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was louder than any words could have been. Her lips parted slightly as if she was about to say something, but no sound came out. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the pull to step back, and the equal pull to stay exactly where she was. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice low, almost trembling despite her usual composure. "Don't blur the line." I could have stepped away then. I should have. But instead, I lowered my voice, steady but soft. "Then show me where the edge is." Her breath caught. I felt it, quick, sharp, against my skin. For a moment, her hands tightened around mine, almost like she was holding on. And then she let go, retreating just slightly, though not enough to erase the closeness that had already been shared. Her face turned away, but not before I caught the flicker of something raw in her expression, fear, longing, maybe both. She pressed her palms against her thighs as if grounding herself, then muttered, "You don't know what you're asking." But I did. Maybe not with clarity, maybe not with reason, but with instinct. What I wanted wasn't instruction or guidance. It was her, the woman behind the rules, the one who let her guard slip in quiet moments. The rest of the session passed in fragments, her voice a little unsteady, my focus divided between the movements she taught and the gravity pulling us closer. By the time we finished, the gym was silent again. But the air between us wasn't empty. It was thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we had almost done. And for the first time, I realized the edge she spoke of wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. The session had run late again, long after most of the building had gone dark. Rain tapped softly against the gym windows, filling the silence between us with a kind of steady rhythm. We sat on the mat for the cool-down, legs stretched out, breathing heavy, shoulders glistening with the faint sheen of exertion. She was beside me, her posture straight, her composure still intact, but only just. A strand of damp hair had slipped loose from her ponytail, brushing against her cheek. Without thinking, I wanted to reach for it, to tuck it gently behind her ear. Instead, I clenched my hands on my knees and focused on her voice. "Inhale slowly," she said, closing her eyes as she demonstrated. "Fill the lungs. Exhale steady." I mirrored her, but my concentration faltered. Because with her eyes shut, her guard seemed to fall completely away. She wasn't the strict coach in that moment, she was simply a woman sitting beside me in the quiet, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her presence soft and grounding. Her hand rested loosely on the mat between us. My own hand twitched, hesitant, caught between restraint and desire. I told myself not to move, not to test the line she had drawn so clearly. But then her fingers shifted, just slightly, brushing against mine. It could have been an accident. It should have been an accident. But when I didn't pull away, she didn't either. Slowly, I let my hand turn, my fingertips grazing hers, testing, waiting. When she still didn't move, I closed the distance, my palm finding hers. Our fingers threaded together hesitantly, like a secret shared in silence. The warmth of her hand was startling. Not because of the heat, but because of the tenderness, the quiet, steady pulse of life meeting mine. Her thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, a motion so small, yet it carried the weight of something she had been holding back for far too long. She opened her eyes then, glancing at me sideways. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice carried a crack I hadn't heard before. This was never supposed to happen. I swallowed, the words heavy in my chest before I let them out. But it did. Her lips parted as though she might argue, but no words came. Instead, she looked down at our joined hands, as if the sight itself unsettled her more than any confession could. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the windows, muting the world beyond. In that cocoon of sound and stillness, we sat with our hands bound together, either of us daring to move. Her head lowered slightly, her breath escaping in a sigh that was equal parts relief and surrender. For just a moment, her shoulder leaned into mine. It wasn't a collapse, it wasn't weakness, it was a choice. A quiet act of trust. I turned my head toward her, close enough to catch the subtle fragrance of her hair, the faint salt of sweat mingling with the softer, more familiar warmth of her perfume. My chest tightened, not from exertion, but from the realization that something irreversible had shifted. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive. It was a hand in another hand, a simple touch. But sometimes that's all it takes to cross the line. The following evening, the gym felt colder than usual. Maybe it was just me, the way my nerves hummed after what had happened the night before. That simple act of holding hands had been small, quiet, yet it carried the weight of everything we tried to avoid. She was already there when I arrived, pacing slowly across the mat. Her posture was stiff, arms folded tightly across her chest, like she was bracing herself against the storm. When her eyes found mine, there was no warmth in them at first, only conflict. "We can't keep doing this," she said before I even set my bag down. Her tone was firm, but underneath it I heard the tremor. I tried to smile gently, tried to ease the tension. "Doing what? Breathing in the same room?" But she didn't return the smile. "Don't joke about this. You know what I mean." I stepped closer, slowly, giving her space to retreat if she wanted to. She didn't move. Her arms stayed crossed, her jaw tight. "People talk. They judge. And I can't afford to blur lines. Not with you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words. It was the first time I realized how much of this was fear, not just of what others might think, but of her own heart betraying her rules. I stopped just in front of her. Close enough that I could feel the energy rolling off her, the way her breath quickened though she tried to hold steady. "I don't want to be just your student anymore," I said quietly. "I don't care what anyone calls it, what anyone thinks. I just want you." Her arms tightened around herself, almost like she was holding her own body together. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then her eyes glistened, and I realized she was fighting tears. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You're younger. You'll move on. And me? I'll be the one left with the pieces." The words hit me hard, not because they pushed me away, but because they were soaked in truth, her truth. All her strength, all her discipline, had been armor. And here, in front of me, it was breaking. Slowly, gently, I reached out. My hand touched her arm, tracing down until I found her wrist. Her skin was warm beneath my fingertips, her pulse quick and uneven. I lifted her hand, unfolding it from where she had crossed it tightly against her chest, and pressed it against me, right over my heart. "Feel that?" I asked softly. My voice almost caught in my throat. That's not temporary. That's not moving on. That's me telling you the only truth I know. Her palm trembled against my chest. She looked up at me, eyes shining, her lips parting as though she wanted to answer. But no words came. Only silence, heavy and fragile, suspended between us. And in that silence, I understood, she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of how much she already cared. The gym was almost completely dark by the time it happened. Only a single row of lights hummed overhead, casting soft pools of illumination across the mats. Beyond the glass windows, the night stretched endlessly, the rain finally easing into silence. It felt as if the world outside had gone quiet just to leave the two of us alone. She was still standing close to me, her hand pressed against my chest where I had placed it. I could feel the hesitation in her touch, the slight tremor of her fingers, the way she seemed caught between pulling away and holding on. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty though. It was heavy, charged, alive with all the words we hadn't dared to say. Finally, her shoulders dropped, just a fraction, like she was letting go of a weight she had carried for too long. She let her forehead rest lightly against my chest, her cheek brushing the fabric of my shirt. The shift was subtle, almost tentative, but it was enough to undo me. I wrapped one arm around her back, slow and careful, as though I was afraid she might vanish if I moved too fast. My palm came to rest against the small of her back, feeling the steady warmth of her body against mine. She didn't resist. Instead, she let out a quiet sigh, soft, almost inaudible, but filled with a relief that words could never capture. We stood like that for a while, just breathing together. My heartbeat steadied under her touch, and I wondered if she could feel how it slowed, how it seemed to match her own rhythm. "You make this too easy," she whispered finally, her voice muffled against my chest. "I've spent so long building walls, and you just walk straight through them." I lowered my chin, letting my voice brush against her hair. "Maybe that's because you never wanted the walls there in the first place." She pulled back slightly then, just enough for our eyes to meet. There was no shield in her gaze anymore, no strict coach, no stern rules, only the raw honesty of a woman who had finally stopped fighting herself. "I'm scared," she admitted. The words were fragile, but they carried more weight than anything she'd said before. "So am I," I answered. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Something in her softened completely then. The tension in her body melted as she leaned into me fully, her arms sliding around my waist. She held me tightly, as if anchoring herself to a choice she had finally allowed herself to make. I pressed a gentle kiss against her hair, the strands damp against my lips, and whispered, "No rules tonight. Just us." The lights above flickered once before dimming further, leaving only shadows stretched across the floor. In that quiet, with the storm outside finally past, we stayed wrapped in each other's arms. Not coach and student. Not forbidden. Just two people who had found something worth breaking the rules for. And in that moment I knew we weren't standing on the edge anymore. We had already crossed it, together. 3.